The cafe opened early enough that the city still felt undecided about the day. Soft morning light slid through tall windows, catching steam rising from espresso machines and the quiet shuffle of commuters not yet fully awake. Outside, Seoul moved in slow preparation. Delivery trucks, distant sirens, heels against pavement. Inside, Danielle Carter preferred the corner table near the window. It had become hers without announcement. Laptop open. Cappuccino untouched for the first 10 minutes. Phone turned face down, a boundary disguised as routine. At 43, Danielle had learned the value of controlled mornings. No rushing, no reacting, no beginning the day already belonging to someone else's demands. She reviewed a presentation slide, adjusted wording, then paused long enough to watch people pass outside. A young couple laughing too loudly, a man arguing gently into his phone, life continuing without asking permission. 3 years earlier, Danielle had followed her husband to Seoul during his international assignment. The marriage ended there, quietly. Instead of returning home, Danielle chose to remain in Seoul and rebuild everything from the ground up. In time, she did. She didn't think about him often anymore, but sometimes memory arrived the way old music did, uninvited, familiar, harmless now. He had left politely. That was almost worse. No shouting, no betrayal discovered dramatically, just a conversation at the kitchen island explaining that he'd grown in a different direction. The different direction had been 24 years old. Danielle closed the thought before it settled. Her life now was stable, better, honestly. Partner at a consulting firm, speaking invitations, travel when she wanted it, evenings that belonged entirely to her. Peace had replaced expectation, and peace, she had learned, was expensive to rebuild, which was why she barely noticed the man approaching her table until coffee splashed across the edge of her laptop. "Oh, damn, I'm so sorry." The voice was calm but genuinely alarmed. Danielle looked up, tall, broad-shouldered, a tailored suit falling cleanly along his frame. His hair was slightly wind-tousled, as if he had walked quickly. Early 30s, maybe. Well-dressed without trying too hard. He was already pulling napkins from the counter behind him. "I didn't see your laptop," he said, carefully blotting the table rather than touching her computer. "Did it get inside?" Danielle checked the keyboard. A small drop near the corner. She exhaled. "I think we survived." Relief crossed his face immediately. Not exaggerated, just real. "Good. I would hate to be responsible for ruining someone's morning productivity." She smiled faintly despite herself. "That depends," she said. "Were you trying to sabotage corporate consulting before 9 a.m.? He paused, amused. Tempting mission. But no. He straightened slightly, still holding napkins. "I owe you another coffee." "You really don't." "I do," he said simply. "I interrupted your work." There was no flirtation in the tone, just certainty. Danielle studied him for a brief second. The easy composure, the lack of awkward overcompensation most younger men fell into when speaking to her. "All right," she said. "Replacement cappuccino." He nodded once as if completing a small agreement, then walked to the counter. She returned to her laptop, but found herself aware of him anyway. Not because he was handsome, though he was. Because he moved like someone accustomed to responsibility. People shifted subtly to give him space without realizing why. A few minutes later he returned, placing the drink carefully beside her. "Peace offering." "Accepted." He hesitated, then gestured lightly toward the empty chair across from her. "May I sit for a minute? Just to confirm you're not secretly filing a lawsuit." That earned a quiet laugh. "You have 60 seconds." He sat. Up close, she noticed steadiness in his eyes. Observant. Present. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Danielle." He smiled at the coincidence. "That feels intentional somehow." "It isn't," she said dryly. Another small silence followed, comfortable rather than strained. "You work nearby?" he asked. "Mostly remote. I have meetings in Gangnam today." He nodded. "Same," she expected. Him to elaborate. He didn't. Instead, he glanced toward her presentation screen. "You're restructuring something." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "You can tell that from one slide?" "Language pattern," he said. "You're simplifying decision pathways." That surprised her. Most people saw charts and immediately lost interest. "You work in consulting?" He shook his head slightly. "Investment strategy." Of course, she thought. Sometimes he arrived first. Sometimes she did. They never scheduled anything. but conversations lengthened, 10 minutes, 15, once nearly 30 before she noticed the time. Daniel listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions without interrogation. He never checked his phone while she talked. That alone set him apart. One morning, as rain streaked the windows, Danielle finally asked, "Do you always talk to strangers this consistently?" He considered the question, carefully. "No." She waited. "I talk to people I find interesting." The answer landed gently, not flirtatious, not heavy, just honest. Danielle stirred her coffee, gaze lowering briefly. "You realize I'm probably at least 10 years older than you." 12, he said calmly. Her head lifted. "You calculated?" I noticed. No embarrassment, no defensiveness. "And that doesn't bother you?" she asked. Daniel leaned back slightly. "Should it bother me?" She studied him, searching for irony. There wasn't any. "Young men sometimes confuse admiration with curiosity," she said, "and older people sometimes assume interest must have an expiration date." The reply was soft, respectful, but firm. Danielle felt something shift inside her then, not attraction exactly, awareness, dangerous territory. She closed her laptop. "I should go." He nodded immediately, standing with her. Outside, rain had slowed to mist. They paused under the cafe awning. "Well," she said lightly, "try not to spill anything next time. I'll continue improving." She started to walk away. "Danielle." She turned. Daniel hesitated only briefly. "Would you have dinner with me sometime?" There it was, simple, direct, no performance. She felt the familiar instinct rise, the careful distance she had built after divorce, after disappointment, after learning how easily stability could disappear. "You don't know enough about me to ask that." "I'm working on that," he said. A small smile tugged at her mouth despite resistance. "And if I say no?" Seoul had thousands of them. "Well," she said, closing her laptop halfway, "your observational skills are impressive for someone who just committed coffee assault." He smiled again, quieter this time. "I'll take partial redemption." He stood after a moment. "I should let you work. No lingering, no attempt to extend the interaction. Just polite closure." Danielle watched him walk toward the door, already assuming the moment had ended exactly where it should. A normal morning interaction. Nothing more. 2 days later he appeared again. Same cafe, different morning. Danielle noticed him only because he paused when he saw her, as though confirming recognition before approaching. "Good news," Daniel said, "no beverages in hand this time." She laughed softly. "You learned, I adapt quickly." He ordered coffee and, without asking, sat briefly across from her again. Conversation unfolded easily. Work frustrations, favorite neighborhoods, the absurd cost of parking downtown. Nothing personal, nothing probing. When he left, Danielle realized something unexpected. She had enjoyed the interruption. Over the next 2 weeks, their meetings became accidental enough to remain believable. "Then I'll still enjoy coffee conversations. No pressure, no persuasion, just patience." Danielle considered him for a long moment, rain tapping softly around them. A younger man standing calmly in front of her, as though the answer mattered, but not urgently. "I'll think about it," she said. Daniel nodded once. "That's fair." She walked toward the subway afterward, feeling something unfamiliar trailing behind her. Not excitement, not fear. Possibility. And she wasn't sure yet whether that was comforting or complicated. Danielle told herself she had forgotten about the dinner invitation. That was the version she preferred. Busy week, client deadlines, a panel discussion in Incheon, flights to coordinate for a leadership retreat, life moving at the efficient pace she had carefully rebuilt after divorce, structured enough that emotions rarely interrupted productivity. And yet, Thursday morning found her choosing her outfit for coffee with slightly more consideration than usual. She noticed it halfway through buttoning her blouse. Annoying. "You're going for coffee," she muttered to herself in the mirror. Not a date. The distinction mattered, because she had not said yes. The cafe was fuller than usual when she arrived. Daniel was already there. He looked up almost immediately, recognition warming his expression in a way that felt personal now, not surprise. Expectation. He stood briefly as she approached, a small gesture most men her age had long abandoned. "Good morning." "Morning." He studied her for half a second. "You look like you've already solved 3 major problems today." "Only 2, she said, setting down her bag. "The third is pending." He smiled, sliding her usual cappuccino toward her. Danielle paused. You ordered for me? I took a risk. She glanced at the cup, then back at him. That's either confident or dangerous. I'm hoping confident. She sat, wrapping her hands around the warmth of the mug. It shouldn't have felt intimate, but it did. Conversation moved easily now. No cautious introductions required. She learned Daniel traveled frequently between Seoul and Busan, that he preferred early mornings because fewer people demanded things from him then, that he read nonfiction almost exclusively but secretly liked old romantic films his mother insisted on rewatching every holiday. He learned Danielle ran complex organizational strategy projects, mentored younger professionals, and cooked elaborate meals only when no one else was around to witness it. You cook privately? He asked. I relax privately, she corrected. He nodded as if understanding something deeper than the words. There was a steadiness about him Danielle found increasingly disarming. No rush, no attempt to impress, just presence. After a pause, he said quietly, Have you thought about dinner? Direct again. She appreciated that more than she expected. Yes. And? Danielle exhaled slowly. I'm hesitant. Danielle didn't interrupt. She appreciated that too. I've only recently reached a place where my life feels balanced, she continued. Dating complicates things. Because of the divorce? She met his gaze. Yes. He absorbed that without curiosity or pity, just acknowledgement. That makes sense, he said. No argument, no reassurance speech, just acceptance. And strangely, that made continuing easier. There's also reality, she added. People notice things. Age differences invite commentary. Danielle leaned forward slightly. I'm not concerned about commentary. I am, she said calmly. Not because I'm insecure. Because I've worked hard for my professional reputation. He nodded once. I respect that. Another pause settled between them. Then he said something unexpected. What if dinner isn't dating? She frowned slightly. Explain. Two people who enjoy talking, he said, continuing a conversation somewhere with better food. The simplicity of it disarmed her defenses more effectively than persuasion would have. No pressure toward romance. No future implication. Just time together. Danielle studied him carefully. You're very patient. Daniel's smile was faint. With things that matter. The words lingered longer than either acknowledged. She looked down at her coffee. Then back at him. All right, she said. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something softened in his eyes. All right? Dinner, she clarified. Conversation. Nothing complicated. Nothing complicated, he agreed. He chose a quiet restaurant in Hanam-dong. Not trendy, not performative. Warm lighting, low conversation. Tables spaced far enough apart for privacy. Danielle noticed immediately. You selected this intentionally. Yes. She removed her coat, amused. You're very strategic. Occupational hazard. Dinner unfolded without effort. They spoke about travel disasters, career pivots, family expectations. Danielle explained that in Korea, success was often seen as something that reflected on the entire family, not just the individual. He asked thoughtful questions, but offered pieces of himself naturally, rather than defensively. At one point she asked, What exactly do you do in investment strategy? He hesitated briefly. I manage part of my family's firm. Part? A large part. There was restraint in the answer. Danielle recognized it instantly, someone accustomed to downplaying influence to avoid changing how people behaved around them. She didn't press. Instead she said, You're careful about how much you reveal. Danielle smiled slightly. So are you. Fair. Later, as dessert arrived, Danielle noticed something unfamiliar. She wasn't evaluating the evening, wasn't calculating emotional risk. She was simply enjoying herself. That realization unsettled her more than attraction would have. Outside, the night air carried early spring warmth. They walked slowly toward the street. Daniel stopped. I had a good time, he said. So did I. Neither moved immediately. The moment stretched, not awkward, just aware. He didn't step closer, didn't assume intimacy. Finally, Danielle said, half teasing, You're surprisingly restrained. Daniel met her gaze steadily. I don't rush things I want to last. The statement landed quietly but unmistakably. Her breath caught just slightly. And for the first time, Danielle realized something important. This wasn't casual interest. He was choosing her deliberately. That realization followed her all the way home. Over the following weeks, Danielle became a gentle presence in her routine. Lunch between meetings, walks along the Han River on Sunday mornings, text messages that were thoughtful but never intrusive. Hope your presentation went well. You mentioned liking this author, thought of you, no excessive attention, just consistency. One evening after work, Danielle joined him at an art exhibit in Gangnam. Watching him move easily through conversations with collectors and organizers, she began noticing details she had missed before. People recognized him, deferred subtly. One gallery owner greeted him with particular familiarity. "Daniel, good to see you again." The tone carried respect bordering on deference. Danielle glanced at him afterward. "You understated your position." He exhaled quietly. "I prefer meeting people without context first." She stopped walking. "How large is your family's firm?" Daniel considered whether honesty would change things, then chose it anyway. "Global." Danielle laughed softly in disbelief. "You're serious?" "Yes." The implications settled slowly. Wealth, influence, public visibility. A moment passed. "Then, Daniel, only where it matters." Danielle set the phone down, smiling despite herself. For years after her divorce, she had believed love, real attention, intentional affection, belonged to an earlier chapter of life, something people experienced before disappointment taught caution. But Daniel wasn't rushing past her defenses. He was waiting at them, patiently, as if he had already decided she was worth the time. And for the first time in a long while, Danielle wondered what it might feel like to be chosen again. Danielle realized something had changed the afternoon she stopped checking herself. Not in mirrors, in reactions. For weeks, time with Daniel had existed in a contained space: coffee shops, quiet dinners, walks where no one paid particular attention. Their connection lived comfortably outside scrutiny, private, manageable, safe. That illusion ended on a Thursday evening. Daniel had invited her to a charity reception at the Liam Samsung Museum of Art. "It's low pressure," he assured her earlier that week. "An arts foundation my family supports. We can stay 20 minutes if you hate it." Danielle had hesitated longer than usual before agreeing. Public settings introduced variables, visibility, interpretation, but avoiding reality indefinitely felt childish, and she refused to behave as though she had something to hide. So she went. The museum glowed with evening light, glass walls reflecting the city skyline. Conversations floated beneath soft music, guests moving slowly between exhibits with champagne in hand. Danielle paused just inside the entrance. "This is not low pressure," she murmured. Daniel smiled beside her. Relatively speaking. He looked effortlessly at ease in a tailored dark suit, greeting people with quiet familiarity rather than showmanship. Danielle noticed immediately how others responded to him. Recognition came first, then respect. Several conversations paused when he entered a space. "Ah," she thought, "now an entirely different world than the one she occupied." She crossed her arms lightly, not defensive, just thinking. "This," she said carefully, gesturing between them, "is exactly the complication I meant." Daniel didn't argue. "I know. You could date anyone," she continued. "Someone younger, someone already part of that environment." "I could," he agreed. "And yet," his answer came without hesitation, "I prefer you, simple, unadorned, certain." Danielle looked away briefly, gathering composure she suddenly needed. The city lights reflected across the water beside them. "You make this sound easy." "It isn't," he said quietly. "But it's clear." She studied him again, the calm certainty, the absence of performance, and something inside her carefully guarded heart shifted another small degree. Not surrender, but trust beginning to consider possibility. Later that night, Danielle sat alone in her apartment, heels kicked off near the door. Her phone lit up with a message. "Daniel, thank you for tonight." She stared at the screen longer than necessary before replying. "Danielle, I'm starting to think you're intentionally persistent." "Understand." A woman approached within minutes. Elegant, late 50s, warm but perceptive eyes. "Daniel." He leaned slightly to kiss her cheek. "Claire." Her gaze shifted to Danielle, instantly curious but gracious. "And you must be Danielle. Not who is this. Not surprise. Just awareness." Daniel introduced them calmly. "Danielle Carter. Claire runs the foundation." Claire's smile deepened. "I've heard you speak about organizational leadership before," she said to Danielle. "Your panel last year was excellent." Danielle blinked, genuinely surprised. "You attended?" "My daughter insisted," Claire said. "She works in policy." Conversation flowed naturally, but Danielle noticed something beneath it, a subtle assessment common in professional circles. Interest. Context gathering, nothing rude, just observation. When Claire moved on, Danielle turned slightly toward Daniel. "You didn't warn me people might recognize me. You're accomplished," he said simply. "That wasn't my concern." "I know." His tone suggested he understood exactly what she meant. As the evening continued, Danielle became increasingly aware of attention, not overt, but present. A glance held slightly longer, a whispered exchange nearby, the difference between anonymity and association. At one point, while Daniel spoke briefly with a donor, Danielle stepped aside near a sculpture display. Two women nearby spoke quietly, unaware she could hear them clearly. "That's Danielle Park." "I know, and I'm not sure. Older, though." A small pause. "Well, interesting choice." Danielle didn't react outwardly. Years of executive leadership had trained her face into composure under scrutiny. Still, the words settled somewhere deeper than she liked. Older. Interesting choice. She picked up a glass of water instead of champagne and focused on the artwork until Daniel returned. "You all right?" he asked immediately. She smiled lightly. "Perfectly." He studied her for a moment longer than usual. Daniel noticed things. Always. They left earlier than planned. Outside, cool air replaced the polite warmth of the event. Danielle walked beside him quietly for several steps before speaking. "This," she said finally, "is the part I worried about." Daniel waited, people evaluating the situation instead of simply accepting it. He nodded slowly. "I expected that might happen." She stopped walking. "You're used to it." "Yes, I'm not." The honesty surprised even her. Daniel faced her fully. "Did someone say something to you?" "No," she said calmly. "Not directly," which somehow felt worse. He exhaled, hands sliding into his coat pockets. "I'm sorry." Danielle shook her head. "You didn't create society." A faint smile touched his mouth. But she continued. "I worked very hard after my divorce to rebuild how people saw me professionally. Stability matters in my field. Credibility matters. I understand. And being perceived as..." She searched for the right word. "Someone's unexpected romantic decision complicates that." Daniel's expression remained steady. Then he said quietly, "You think being with me diminishes how people see you?" Danielle hesitated. "I think people simplify narratives they don't understand." Silence settled between them. Traffic moved past in soft waves of light. Finally, Daniel said, carefully, "May I tell you something honestly?" She nodded. "I don't see you as someone I chose unexpectedly." His voice remained calm, grounded. "I see you as someone exceptional." The words weren't dramatic. They carried weight precisely because he didn't exaggerate. "I admire how you move through the world," he continued. "Your intelligence, your composure, the way people listen when you speak." Danielle felt warmth rise unexpectedly beneath her calm exterior. "This isn't novelty for me," he said. "It's intention." She looked away briefly, absorbing that. Because he meant it. And sincerity was harder to deflect than charm. 2 nights later, reality pressed closer from another direction. Danielle attended a networking reception hosted by her firm, professional territory, safe ground, until she saw Mark. Her ex-husband stood near the bar, laughing with colleagues, looking almost exactly the same as he had the day he left, confident, comfortable, untouched by consequence. Beside him stood his new wife, young, beautiful, effortlessly fitting the narrative Danielle once feared defined her replacement. For a moment, old emotion flickered. Not heartbreak, just memory. Then Mark noticed her. Surprise crossed his face before he approached. "Danielle." "Mark." Polite smiles. Civil distance. "You look good," he said. "I am good." His gaze lingered a moment, assessing. "I heard you've been doing well professionally." "I have." A pause followed. Then, casually, too casually, he added, "Someone mentioned seeing you at the museum event the other night." Of course they had. Seoul was small that way. Danielle held his gaze evenly. "Yes." Mark hesitated. "I didn't realize you were dating again." The slight emphasis didn't escape her. "Neither did I," she said calmly. He laughed awkwardly. "Well, Good for you. But curiosity remained visible. And he's younger, right? There it was. Not cruel, just incredulous. Danielle felt something unexpected then, not embarrassment. Clarity. Yes, she said simply. Mark nodded slowly, processing. I guess everyone moves on differently. Danielle smiled politely. Yes, they do. She excused herself moments later, conversation complete. Walking away, she realized something important. Mark's opinion no longer mattered. Not truly. What unsettled her wasn't judgment. It was how much Daniel's presence now influenced how she saw herself again. Later that evening, Daniel called, not texted, called. I was thinking about you, he said when she answered. Danielle leaned against her kitchen counter, tired but oddly comforted by his voice. I survived a professional gathering involving my past life. That sounds ominous. I saw my ex-husband. A small pause. And, she considered her answer carefully. It didn't hurt. Daniel exhaled quietly, relief unmistakable. I'm glad. Another silence followed, comfortable now. Then Danielle said softly, almost to herself, This is becoming real. Yes, Daniel said. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just acknowledgement. She closed her eyes briefly, because real meant risk. Real meant allowing someone close enough to matter again. And, somewhere between spilled coffee and quiet persistence, Daniel had crossed that distance. After they ended the call, Danielle stood by her window overlooking the city lights. For years she had believed love belonged to youth, to earlier chapters before disappointment reshaped expectations. But Daniel didn't treat her like a second chance. He treated her like the right one, and slowly, carefully, she was beginning to believe him. Danielle noticed the shift before anyone said it aloud. Daniel stopped behaving as though their relationship existed in careful compartments, not abruptly, not dramatically, just naturally. He invited her into parts of his life that were no longer incidental, and that changed everything. It began on a Sunday morning. They walked along the Han River. Near Hanam-dong, early enough that runners and dog walkers outnumbered tourists. The river moved slowly beside them, sunlight breaking across the water in quiet flashes. Danielle held her coffee with both hands, enjoying the calm. Daniel walked beside her, unhurried as always. You're thinking about something, she said without looking at him. I am. She smiled faintly. You get quieter when you're deciding how to say something. He glanced at her, amused. You've learned my patterns. I observe for a living. A few more steps passed before he spoke. My parents are hosting a dinner next weekend. Danielle immediately understood the implication. She stopped walking. Daniel stopped with her. And, she asked carefully, I'd like you to come with me. There it was. Not casual, not accidental. An introduction. Danielle exhaled slowly. That feels significant. It is. He didn't soften it or pretend otherwise. She appreciated that, even as hesitation rose instinctively. Daniel, she searched for precise language. Meeting family changes the context of things. I know, and your family operates at a level where relationships aren't just personal decisions. A faint smile touched his mouth. You understand faster than most people. She crossed her arms lightly, thinking, I don't want to become a topic of strategic discussion at someone's dining table. You won't, he said calmly. She raised an eyebrow. You can guarantee that? No, he admitted, but I can guarantee how I respond to it. That answer mattered more than reassurance would have. Still, Danielle hesitated, not because she doubted him, because accepting meant acknowledging how serious this had become. 3 months ago, she had been rebuilding quiet independence. Now, a younger heir to a global firm was asking her to step into his family's world. Life had a strange sense of humor. You're very certain about this, she said. Daniel met her gaze steadily. I'm certain about you. The simplicity of it unsettled her defenses again. He wasn't escalating emotionally. He was simply continuing forward. After a long moment, Danielle nodded once. All right. Relief flickered briefly across his expression, gone almost instantly, but she caught it, and something warm settled in her chest. The dinner took place at his parents' home in Songbuk-dong. Danielle understood immediately that home was an understatement. The property sat behind understated gates, elegant rather than ostentatious. Warm lighting glowed through large windows, the architecture modern but welcoming. Daniel noticed her taking it in. You can still change your mind, he said quietly as they approached the entrance. She smiled. I've presented quarterly restructuring plans to rooms full of hostile executives. He laughed softly. I believe you'll survive. The door opened before they knocked. His mother greeted them first. Graceful, observant, warm eyes that immediately reminded Danielle of Daniel himself. Daniel, she said, embracing him before turning toward Danielle. And you must be Danielle. No surprise, no hesitation, just calm curiosity. Danielle extended her hand, but Daniel's mother gently pulled her into a brief hug instead. We're very happy to finally meet you. Finally. Danielle noticed the word. Inside, the atmosphere surprised her, not formal. Family photographs lined the walls. Soft conversation drifted from the dining room. Daniel's father stood as they entered, distinguished, composed, carrying quiet authority without intimidation. Dinner unfolded smoothly. Conversation ranged from travel to education policy to art acquisitions. Danielle held her own easily, years of professional leadership making high-level discussions second nature. She noticed something. Gradually, Daniel's parents weren't evaluating her age, they were evaluating her intellect, presence, character. At one point his father asked, "What do you enjoy most about your work?" Not a test, a genuine question. Danielle answered honestly about helping organizations function more humanely, about leadership decisions affecting real lives. Daniel watched her speak, pride unmistakable in the quiet attention he gave her. His mother noticed. Danielle saw that too. Later, while Daniel stepped away briefly to take a call, his mother poured tea and sat beside her. He speaks about you often, she said gently. Danielle blinked. He does? Yes. A small smile. My son is thoughtful with his attention. He doesn't invest it lightly. Danielle absorbed that quietly. I wasn't expecting any of this, she admitted. His mother nodded knowingly. Life rarely follows expected timelines. There was kindness in the statement, not probing, not judgmental, just understanding. When Daniel returned, conversation resumed effortlessly. But Danielle realized something important before the evening ended. He hadn't brought her here cautiously. He had brought her proudly. The shift became unmistakable days later. Daniel attended one of Danielle's professional speaking engagements. He sat quietly near the back of the room while she presented to senior executives about organizational leadership and employee culture. Danielle noticed him immediately, but continued without acknowledging it. Afterward, several colleagues approached her. One leaned closer, smiling. Your partner seems very impressed. Danielle followed her gaze. Daniel stood speaking politely with attendees who had introduced themselves to him. Not inserting himself, just present. When he walked toward her afterward, his expression carried genuine admiration. You're remarkable up there, he said. She laughed lightly. You sound surprised. I'm not surprised, he corrected. I'm impressed. He said it without hesitation, without insecurity. And suddenly Danielle understood something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. Daniel wasn't intimidated by her success. He admired it, supported it, celebrated it. That realization settled deeply. Because her marriage had slowly eroded under subtle competition, neither of them had acknowledged until it was too late. With Daniel, there was no competition, only alignment. But the outside world continued noticing. An article appeared online days later covering the Museum Foundation event. A photograph captured Daniel speaking with donors, Danielle beside him. The caption mentioned her by name. Social media followed quickly, speculation polite but unmistakable. A colleague forwarded the link with a teasing message. You've been keeping interesting company. Danielle stared at the screen longer than she liked. Reality had arrived. Public association, narrative forming without her participation. That evening she sat across from Daniel at dinner, phone resting beside her plate. You've seen it, she said. Yes. And? He shrugged slightly. It was inevitable. Danielle studied him. You're very calm about this. I told you, he said gently. I'm not hiding you. The words landed with unexpected emotional weight. Not possession, recognition. He continued quietly. I don't want our relationship to exist only where it's convenient. Danielle felt her carefully maintained composure soften. For years after her divorce, she had protected herself by minimizing emotional visibility, by keeping relationships hypothetical rather than real. Daniel was offering something different, visibility without hesitation, choice without embarrassment. She leaned back slightly, considering him. You understand this means people will talk. They already do. And that doesn't bother you? Daniel reached across the table, resting his hand lightly over hers. No. A small pause. It only matters whether it bothers you. Danielle looked at their hands, then back at him. For a long time after her marriage ended, she had believed being chosen fully, openly, was something reserved for younger versions of herself. But here he was, doing exactly that, and slowly, almost reluctantly, she realized she wanted it too. That night, standing outside her building, Daniel hesitated before she went inside. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." He searched her face briefly. "Are you still afraid this won't fit into your life?" Danielle considered carefully. "Yes," she admitted. Honesty mattered now. "But I'm starting to think maybe my life was never meant to stay small just to feel safe." Danielle smiled softly. "That sounds like progress," she laughed. "It sounds like risk." He stepped closer, not overwhelming, just near enough that warmth replaced distance. "Some risks," he said quietly, "are worth taking slowly." Danielle held his gaze, and for the first time, she leaned forward first. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, certain. Not the beginning of something reckless, but the acknowledgement of something already real. Danielle did not immediately tell anyone about the kiss. Not her closest friends, not her sister, not even the colleague who knew nearly everything about her life. Some moments felt too important to expose to commentary too quickly. She wanted to understand it first. Because something had changed, not dramatically but fundamentally. For months, she and Daniel had existed in careful progression. Conversation, trust, shared space growing naturally between them. The kiss removed ambiguity, and strangely, that made Danielle quieter, rather than euphoric. She found herself paying attention to smaller things. How Daniel reached for her hand automatically when crossing busy streets. How he listened when she spoke about work frustrations, as though details mattered. How comfortable silence had become between them. It wasn't intensity, it was steadiness. And steadiness frightened her more than passion ever had. A week later, Danielle hosted a small dinner at her apartment. It was the first time Daniel entered her space. She noticed his reaction immediately when he stepped inside. He looked around slowly, not assessing value or design, but absorbing pieces of her life. Bookshelves filled with leadership texts and novels. Framed travel photographs, fresh flowers near the window. "It feels exactly like you," he said. Danielle set her keys down. "I'm not sure whether that's a compliment." "It is." He walked toward a photograph on the shelf, her standing beside a conference panel years earlier. "You've built a lot," he said quietly. There was admiration in his voice again. Never envy, never comparison, just respect. She moved into the kitchen to finish dinner, aware of him following comfortably rather than hovering. "You don't seem nervous," she said. "Should I be?" "First time seeing how someone actually lives," she replied. "It reveals things." Daniel leaned lightly against the counter. "I already know who you are." The certainty in his tone made her glance up. "That's a confident statement. It's an observed one." Dinner unfolded easily. Music low, conversation moving between serious and playful without effort. At one point Danielle caught herself laughing freely, the sound unfamiliar in its lack of restraint. She realized she hadn't monitored herself once all evening. No emotional guarding, no performance, just presence. Afterward they moved to the balcony overlooking the city lights. Spring air carried warmth now. Daniel stood beside her, shoulder brushing hers naturally. "This is my favorite time of day," Danielle said. "When everything slows down." He nodded. "You seem peaceful here. I worked hard for that peace." He turned slightly toward her. "I know." A quiet pause followed. Then Danielle spoke before she could reconsider. "My marriage didn't end dramatically," she said. "People assume betrayal or fighting, but it was quieter." Daniel listened without interruption. "He stopped choosing the life we built," she continued. "And I didn't realize how lonely I'd already become until he left." The admission hung in the air. "I promised myself afterward," she added softly, "that I would never depend on someone emotionally the same way again." Daniel considered her words carefully. "That sounds like survival," he said. It was. She turned toward him fully. "And now you're here asking me to risk that stability again." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm not asking you to lose stability. Then what are you asking?" Danielle hesitated only briefly. To share it. The distinction landed deeper than she expected. No rescue narrative, no emotional takeover. Partnership. Danielle looked away toward the skyline, absorbing the quiet sincerity of it. You make this feel safe, she admitted. It should feel safe. Another silence settled, comfortable, honest. Then he said something that shifted everything. I'm not interested in convincing you quickly. She frowned slightly. No? Danielle shook his head. I want you to believe me naturally. The words settled slowly inside her. Because belief, not attraction, had always been the real barrier. Attraction was easy. Trust was earned. A few days later, reality tested that fragile belief. Danielle attended a professional luncheon when a colleague approached cautiously. I hope you don't mind me asking, the woman said, lowering her voice, but are you involved with Daniel Park? Danielle paused. Yes. The colleague nodded thoughtfully. He's very visible right now. Business press, philanthropy boards. People notice who he spends time with. Danielle held her composure. I'm aware. The woman smiled kindly for what it's worth. You seem happy. The comment surprised her. Not judgment, observation. And Danielle realized something then. People weren't universally critical. Some simply saw what was real. That evening she met Daniel after work. They walked through a quiet park, dusk settling around them. Danielle stopped near a bench. I need to ask you something honestly, always. She faced him. This isn't temporary for you, is it? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Not because he doubted, but because he understood the weight behind the question. No, he said finally. His voice was calm, certain. I don't invest time this way casually. She searched his expression. You understand our lives look very different. Yes, and eventually expectations will come. About marriage, image, family. Daniel nodded once. They already exist. And that doesn't concern you? It only concerns me if it pressures you. Danielle felt emotion rise unexpectedly. Not fear this time, but recognition. He wasn't idealizing her. He wasn't chasing novelty. He had thought about the future already. Carefully. Intentionally. Why me? She asked quietly. The question escaped before she could filter it. Daniel smiled slightly, not amused, just gentle. Because when I'm with you, he said, I feel calm. She blinked. I've met many impressive people, he continued, but very few who feel real. His gaze softened. You know who you are. You don't perform for approval. You make space for people to be honest. Danielle felt her throat tighten slightly. And I admire that, he finished. No grand declaration. Just truth. And suddenly something inside her finally settled. For months she had waited for uncertainty, for signs this was infatuation or curiosity that would fade. But Daniel remained consistent, patient, certain. She realized then she no longer doubted his feelings. The hesitation left belonged entirely to her past. Danielle stepped closer. Her hand found his naturally. I think, she said slowly, I'm starting to believe you. Daniel's expression softened, not triumphant, just relieved. That's enough. And for the first time since her divorce, Danielle allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't feel like recovery, but continuation. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Danielle reflected on how quietly everything had changed. Love hadn't returned dramatically. It hadn't demanded attention. It had arrived patiently, through conversation, consistency, choice repeated over time, and somewhere along the way, she stopped feeling like a woman rebuilding after loss. She felt wanted, seen, chosen, not despite her life experience, but because of it. Summer arrived gradually in Seoul, longer evenings, open restaurant patios, the city softening into warmth after months of restraint. Danielle noticed how naturally Daniel now existed inside her life. There had been no defining moment where things officially changed, no dramatic declaration marking transition from dating into something deeper. It simply happened. He knew which mornings she preferred silence before meetings. She knew when his travel schedule exhausted him, even if he insisted he was fine. Their routines began overlapping until separation felt less natural than togetherness. And still, Danielle occasionally caught herself waiting for uncertainty. Old habits took time to disappear. The invitation came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Daniel called while she was finishing work. Are you free Saturday? He asked. I think so. Why? A small gathering at our foundation property outside the city. Nothing formal. She smiled faintly. You always say that. This time I mean it. Something in his tone felt thoughtful, carefully arranged but not secretive. "All right," she said. "I'll come." The property overlooked rolling green hills in Yongpyong, just outside Seoul. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across gardens and stone walkways as guests moved easily between conversation groups. It truly was smaller than previous events. Friends, colleagues, a few family connections. Comfortable, intentional. Danielle stayed close without hovering, introducing her naturally rather than ceremonially. Danielle realized something important as the evening unfolded. No one seemed surprised by her presence anymore. She wasn't being evaluated. She belonged. That realization settled quietly but deeply. As sunset approached, Danielle touched her arm gently. "Walk with me?" They moved away from the gathering toward a path leading down a small hill overlooking the valley below. Cicadas hummed softly in the distance. For a moment neither spoke. Danielle sensed purpose now, not pressure, just meaning. "You've been very patient with me," she said lightly. Danielle glanced at her. "I never felt rushed," she smiled. "That's because you weren't the one relearning how to trust happiness." He didn't argue. They reached a quiet overlook where golden light spread across the landscape. Danielle turned toward her fully. "I wanted tonight to feel normal," he said. "It does." He nodded once, as if confirming something internally. Then he spoke carefully. "When we first met, I wasn't expecting anything significant." Danielle laughed softly. "You spilled coffee on me. One of my better decisions, apparently." She smiled, but sensed seriousness beneath his calm tone. Danielle continued. "I've spent most of my life around relationships shaped by expectation. Timelines, appearances, strategic compatibility." She listened quietly. "And then I met you," he said. "And everything felt uncomplicated." Danielle's expression softened. "You make my life quieter," he added. "Better." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten slightly. "I don't want something temporary with you," he said. "Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just clear. I want a life where you're part of it." The words hung gently between them. Danielle reached into his jacket, not hurriedly, and Danielle's breath caught before she could stop herself. He noticed immediately. A small smile touched his mouth. "I'm not proposing tonight," he said softly. She laughed in relief and embarrassment. "Good. Because my heart just accelerated dangerously." He pulled out a small velvet box anyway. Danielle blinked. "Daniel." He opened it. Inside rested a simple, elegant ring, not extravagant, just beautiful. Her confusion showed instantly. "This belonged to my grandmother," he explained. "She believed commitment begins long before marriage." Danielle looked from the ring back to him. "I'm not asking you for an answer tonight," he said gently. "I'm asking you to understand where I stand." He held her gaze steadily. "I see a future with you, and whenever you're ready for that future fully, I'll be here. No pressure, no timeline, just certainty offered openly." Danielle felt emotion rise unexpectedly, not overwhelming but profound. Because for years she had quietly believed love after divorce came with conditions. Compromise, reduced expectation, careful optimism. But Danielle wasn't offering cautious affection. He was offering permanence, with patience. Her voice softened. "You're very sure about this. I've been sure for a long time." She looked at the ring again, then back at him. "And if I take longer than you expect?" Danielle smiled. "I already planned for that." A laugh escaped her, emotional warmth breaking through restraint. She stepped closer. "You know," she said quietly, "after my marriage ended, I thought the best part of my life had already happened." He listened carefully. "I rebuilt everything alone," she continued, "and I convinced myself that independence was enough." Danielle's expression softened. "But then you kept showing up," she said. "Coffee mornings, walks, conversations, patience without demand. And somewhere along the way," she finished, "I stopped protecting myself from happiness." The admission lingered between them. Danielle reached forward, closing his hand gently around the ring box. "I'm not afraid anymore." Danielle's shoulders relaxed slightly, the first visible release of tension she had ever seen from him. She smiled softly. "I don't need more time to know I want this," she added. His eyes searched hers carefully. "You're sure?" Danielle nodded. "Yes. Not rushed, not impulsive, certain." She took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger herself. Not an engagement, not yet, but a promise understood by both of them. Daniel exhaled quietly, emotion finally visible beneath composure. He pulled her into an embrace, warm, steady, grounding. The valley below faded into evening light as Danielle rested against him, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like someone rebuilding after loss. She felt like a woman stepping into the next chapter of her life willingly, chosen, and choosing back. Later, returning toward the gathering hand in hand, Danielle realized something quietly extraordinary. Love hadn't come to rescue her. It hadn't replaced who she became after heartbreak. It met her there, whole, accomplished, experienced, and simply asked to walk beside her. And this time she said yes without hesitation. Thank you for listening to Neon Obsidian, where every story lingers a little longer.